Hello, everybody. It's JD. This is typically not how we begin these episodes. However, we had a technical issue and therefore we lost the video. Unfortunately, however, we do have the audio available, so we still have the review. You're going to hear it and all of its audio glory. You just won't be able to see Christian and I. Unfortunately, we had that technical hiccup. But we found out what the issue is. We have fixed it. Hopefully, we do not have that issue in the future. But for this episode, you'll still get the audio here. So apologies up front. But we do hope that you enjoy this podcast review of the American Society of Magical Negroes.
Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for March 18th, 2024, and I am JD Duran. My lovely co-host Brendan Cassidy is still out. He will be back shortly. I can confirm that he's alive. I don't know if anyone out there is concerned. It's been a minute since Brendan has been on the show, but he's doing okay. He's going to come back soon. I can promise you that. However, he is not here for this episode. Joining me for this lovely conversation is friend of the show. We love him. You love him. Christian Eulinberg. He's back. Hello, Christian.
Hey.
How we doing?
Hello. What's going on? Thank you so much for having me on again. I'm very
Yeah.
excited to talk about today's film, and I hope Brendan's getting better out there. I send him memes at any time that I can.
Yep.
Any amazing Instagram reels, so I hope that is lifting his spirits.
Yep. I'm sure it is. We always love lifting Brendan's spirits when we can. I hope he's recovering nicely. Again, he'll be back soon. But yeah, Christian is here to talk the American Society of Magical Negroes with me, which is a film that has a very interesting story thus far, in the sense that it's announced. I want to say that there's some level of hype and buzz for this without people have seen the trailer, right? People are just aware of the film's existence, and there's a little bit of hype, a little bit of, okay, let's see what this is about. Then the first trailer comes, and it is severe and utter disappointment, I would say, is the general consensus from most. And then the reviews drop from Sundance, and boy, oh boy, did it come with a sledgehammer. And that seemed, Christian, to be indicative of how this fared at the box office. Do you know how much money this film made at the box office over the weekend? Did you see the number?
I did not see the number.
Do you
Not at all.
even want to take a guess?
No.
'Cause
Okay,
I don't think. Now, to be fair, I don't have the number in front of me for how many screens. So I don't know how wide the film released, but I don't think it was a limited release. I want to say it played in a fair number of screens. Maybe I can try to find that number.
Yeah,
That aside, it's opening weekend. How much money do you think it made if you had to just throw out a guess?
I just want to let everyone out there know how bad I am with math, and math has never been my friend. But I'm gonna guess like 50 million.
50 million is incorrect, and you
Okay.
are off, Christian, by about $49 million. This film
Wow.
made $1.3 million in 1,147 theaters.
I thought that was way too low.
So that
I was gonna say
low.
5 million.
That's,
I was like, that's too low. There's no way.
Yeah, that's real low.
Wow.
So nobody went to see this movie.
Well, we did, but yeah.
Just to break that down a little bit further. In day one on March 15th, again, 1,147 theaters. Its average per day, or the average for the day, was $457. The average for Saturday was $408. And then on Sunday, which is when I saw it, $270 average. Wow. 1.3 million. Now, that isn't indicative of anything, right? Because we've talked about here on the show something like Moonlight, for example, which is a small indie film, of course. And I would have to look it up as far as how many screens it had. But on its initial run, not just its opening weekend, I'm almost positive, like on its initial run, it only made like 5 million. Its opening weekend was probably similar, like $1 million. Moonlight made all of its money with Oscars, which is a whole nother conversation. Which is to say, like, at $1.3 million, it's not great, but it's not indicative of anything. A Moonlight is obviously great. It won Best Picture. It deservedly won Best Picture. So making a small amount of money isn't, it's not indicative of anything. And I don't think this film, also to be fair, had a ton of marketing behind it. Did you see a lot of marketing? I know they dropped the one trailer. It had the premiere at Sundance. Did it do anything else? Were there commercials for this on TV? I don't really recall seeing anything. Do you?
No. So I accidentally got this mixed up with another movie that came out earlier this year, The Book of Clarence. I thought everyone was talking about that movie. And then I looked into it further. I'm like, okay, no, there's two different films. I'm like, okay, Book of Clarence came out like, I think it was
in January.
February.
Yeah.
So I had missed that one totally. And for some reason, I thought that was this movie. But no, to answer your question, I have not seen maybe like a YouTube ad here or there while, scouring the internet, but nothing to like the effect of like Dune Part 2, or because this was Focus Features, correct? I believe so.
You might be right on that. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And look, I'm not saying that. Yeah. Focus Features. That is correct.
Okay.
See it here. Like, I don't think this film was ever going to make Dune money. Don't get me wrong. I'm not necessarily saying that, but $1.3 million is still pretty low, even for a film of this stature. And that's rough. That's just real rough. Nobody went to see it. And I kind of wonder what's driving that. Is it the film's quality, which we'll talk about, or is it the disappointment that it's not what people thought it was going to be? That it was more of this commentary than it was about, the magic of it all? Or is it the reviews just being so bad that people just dismiss the film altogether? I don't know. Maybe it's a combination of all of the above. And that's how we sit here. So.
I get it's a weird one, man. I mean, even looking at the title, I'm like, okay, this is a comedy, 1,000%. It's a funny title, but like it's an unexpected title.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, this is definitely a comedy, but it's I'm not sure if the factor of, do people even go watch comedies in theaters anymore has to do with the reflection of this movie. Not saying it's the entire thing, because there's some other things we'll get into, but I wonder.
Yeah, I wonder as well. At any rate, with that laid out, let's go ahead and jump into the American Society of Magical Negroes. It is written and directed. This is a first-time feature from Kobi Libii. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. and it stars Justice Smith, David Alan Greel, Anne Lee Bogan, Drew Tarver, and a few others that come and go throughout the film, including Rupert Friend in an interesting little role later on in the movie. If you're not familiar with the American Society of Magical Negroes, and based off the box office, either there are very few people listening to this, Christian, or you're not familiar. One of the two, but just in case, it is about a young man named Aaron who is recruited into a secret society of magical black people who dedicate their lives to a cause of utmost importance, making white people's lives easier. Okay, obviously the film is taking the magical Negro stereotype as its root, as the basis for a lot of its satirical commentary here, and it somewhat denotes that up front with some text as we get into the movie. With that said, Christian, what did you think about the American Society of Magical Negroes?
So, I know I'm a person of color. Clearly, you can see that.
Yeah.
Here.
Yes, you are.
I gotta say, I don't think I've ever really heard the term magical Negro before.
No, you were not familiar with the trope?
No, I was not, because during the beginning of the movie, they explain what it is.
Yep.
And I was like, it sounds like maybe a little I might have heard it once in my life. Maybe. But like outside of that, I got nothing. I was like, I guess there's a different term, because I guess, you know, looking it up on Google, it's the supporting stock character who comes to the aid of the white protagonist in a film.
Yeah.
So I know the definition. I know the meaning of the definition. I just didn't know that was what magical Negro meant. I just thought that, you know, there's like the quote unquote white savior movies. And I thought that was kind of like the same thing, where it's like, oh, you know, you have the main character and then the black character is the supporting character. So I don't know.
They
Either
can
way,
sometimes be one and the same, depending on the movie and the story.
Right. And I wasn't entirely sure. But I mean, I didn't really know what to expect from this movie. I don't even think I might have seen the trailer once. And I will say this first and foremost. The one good thing that I liked about this movie was Justice Smith's like nimble-esque performance, because I think he does a fantastic job. And honestly, that was the only real reason I was gonna go see this movie outside of David Alan Grier.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I've pretty much watched like everything Justice Smith has been in, and he plays, like, the character he plays in this film is very much the type of person I would imagine him to be if I ever were to meet him in person. But and that's not a slight. It's just he just seems like that kind of person. I've met people like that as well in my life.
Yeah.
But this film was not good. It was weird. I didn't know what the premise was. I'm like, okay, so it's all about like black people making white people happy because, you know, like the dangers that come with it. You have to keep, you know, the white man happy in order to avoid any type of altercation. And I was like, okay, it's a silly premise. And I was like, maybe if they went a different direction with this, because I don't think I laughed once. And when I went to go see it, there were maybe 5 of us in the theater. Some people chuckled here and there, but you can definitely tell within the film where they take like this super long break expecting for the audience to like laugh. And I just wasn't. I didn't hate the film. It's just, it was weird. And there's a lot of loose ends in this film where I thought there was like one good-ish scene that I liked, but the aftermath, it didn't really go anywhere. And I was like, okay. But overall, like, it was honestly, I kind of forgot about as we were talking off mic. I was like, what did I do Saturday? Oh yeah, I went to go see this movie. So
Yeah. No, I don't blame you at all there, Christian. I'm with you. I did not like the film all that much either. I admire its ambition, but its premise and world building doesn't really coordinate with its almost rom-com sensibilities, even though the two films are tonally on polar opposite ends of the spectrum. I couldn't help but think of something like Jordan Peele's Get Out, because that's a film that equally has a premise with, let's say, supernatural qualities. But inside of that premise is Chris, the main character of that film, and his individual journey as he attempts to navigate this new mystic world that he's stuck in. And similarly with this film, you have Aaron, who becomes entangled in an otherworldly realm, and it's about his own journey of discovery as he equally attempts to navigate this new world and his role within it. The big difference between them, however, is that Get Out never loses sight of Chris as a character or the premise that entraps him. They bleed together synonymously, and that's why the horror of that film is so effective. In this film, Aaron's relational dynamic with Jason and Lizzie almost feel completely separate from the American Society of Magical Negroes. In so many ways, they don't feel like they need each other until they do, which is why the film often comes off manufactured because it's like you're watching two different movies. One that wants to be a satirical Harry Potter knockoff, and another that's a conventional Hollywood rom-com, but with a political edge to it. Imagine watching When Harry Met Sally, and then it's suddenly interrupted by a different Harry. I think you know which one I'm talking about. It just doesn't work. It's not blended seamlessly at all, and the back and forth renders a little bit of whiplash. Admittedly, kind of to what you were saying, it's a little funny at times. It got a few chuckles out of me, but on the same token, the humor that doesn't land is often so cringy and woefully tacky, and that left me disengaged as well. It's a double-edged sword with a lot of the comedy of the film. It's a movie that has an idea. It wanted to circumvent a long-lasting trope, and there is some sincerity to that here, but it lacks bite. It's sluggishly woven together and sadly more frivolous than anything in the end, I think.
I agree. And I think another movie, what reminds me of this film, which I think also did, if they would have just played more into the satire altogether, like that would have been fine. Another like satire movie that recently came out, The Blackening, where I was like, okay, that was funny, but like, and that was, you know, the satire was there. Obviously, it's just like its own little knockoff. But something here, I was just like, I not saying that I don't like the idea, because I think the idea would have been phenomenal if they would have just expanded on it. And like you said, the world building is a little all over the place. There's no real repercussions. Like you see a few things that happen in the film, and it's like, oh, well, I guess that's a terrible thing, but it's not. It didn't really hit with me at all. But with between Justice Smith and then we had Drew Tarver, who played Jason, I thought their chemistry was actually like done really, really well as the love interest who plays Lizzie, on Lee Bogan. I thought those three characters, in my opinion, were probably the highlight of this entire movie. Like David Alan Grier he's there, but you know, he kind of serves as like the exposition character, the Dumbledore almost, kind of, sort of. Yeah. He's kind of just there, and you know, he cracks his jokes, and I did not. Some of the writing was well done, because there's an interesting conversation between Justice Smith, I'll just say Aaron and Jason, when they were playing like video games together. I thought that was pretty eye-opening for people who don't understand certain contexts and certain things that happen in America. But I thought that was great. And then they share another scene later on. But yeah, it was the supporting characters outside of those three, they were pretty forgetful. Like, you had a lot of there was a few supporting characters. I was like, okay, like, I mean, they're here, but it just doesn't, the film doesn't really focus too much on anyone else. And okay, like, you have this society of magical Negroes and you don't spend a lot of time with them. It's just kind of like a safe haven or like a central hub of the film.
That's it. That is exactly the problem of this film. Fundamentally, the premise is compelling. And as far as I know, I don't think there's been another film to create a satire out of this specific trope. So there is a lure there fundamentally. And the way the film introduces it, I do think is also kind of alluring. There's that moment when Aaron first arrives at the Magical Society and we're introduced to their rules, when Aaron hears them talk about why black people willingly yield their blackness in order to pander to white folks, something that he kind of scoffs at initially. It's almost as if he sees it as regressive as we do. Then there's the moment where they show him some examples of society members from the past doing the job, and it hilariously mocks films like The Green Mile and The Legend of Bagger Vance and others that are very much akin to those. But once Aaron commits to the job, it becomes much more vague if the film is in on the joke or becoming a victim to it, because Aaron's interest in Lizzie, which is admittedly charming, it has nothing to do with the Magical Society. And as a result, the film's satirical angle really suffers by the time we get to Aaron's speech at the end. As affable as it is, it's just not enough, especially when the film's politics are very thin to begin with. This back and forth of Aaron at the social media job and him becoming interested in Lizzie, as much as I want to lean into that because of the performances, and I do agree with you about the performances here in a vacuum anyway, that on its own terms is great. But then it's interrupted again by this magical movie all of a sudden. Like, I cannot reiterate the whole when Harry met Sally thing. That's a lot of what it is. Like, it's either a rom-com or it's a magical movie. It's those two things just don't blend. And as a result, I think both stories suffer when it's constantly interrupted by both. There's just a tug of war there that just doesn't work. So that is exactly, you're hitting the nail on. That's why this film is so frustrating. It can't really get as deep as it wants to, either in terms of lore or politics, because it's wanting to be a satire on one end, but also be a genuine rom-com over here on the other end of it. And it is so constantly at odds with each other.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, when you were saying, you know, the movie is all about making white people comfortable. Yeah. I'm not sure. Have you seen Community, the TV show?
Bits here and there.
So this whole movie reminded me of Keith David's character in that show. He plays a character named Leroy.
Okay.
And he shows up in, I think it's like season 5 or season 6 of Community, and it's like a wedding episode where Keith David's character Leroy is invited to. And he said that there's this running joke where he was nervous about going to the wedding because every time he gets around like a group or like a flock of like white people, he tries to make them uncomfortable. Like, not uncomfortable, but he tries to make them comfortable. Like, he's like the one black guy at the party who's like building white people up.
Yeah.
And it's a running joke throughout the entire episode. For anyone out there who's listening, if you know, you know, but it is the funniest thing. And this movie reminded me of Keith David's character in Community, because he's like, yeah, I just have a really bad problem about uplifting white people. He's like, I used to do it for years, and he's like starting to relapse. And oh my gosh, it's like I'll just send you the episode. It's the funniest thing ever. Yeah. But that is what this movie reminded me of. And I was like, I don't know if people are gonna really like that, because it, like you said, it's like, it depends on how you tackle it. And you know, just there's just a lot going on where like there's bits and parts that I like, but again, there's really no repercussions towards the end of the movie anyway. It's kind of just,
it's about the rom-com of it all. Like, it's a magical rom-com is what it turns into, which is weird because it begins as a satire, like a social commentary.
Yeah.
That's what it's aiming to be, but that's
what
really
it's marketed as as well.
Evolves into.
That's what it's marketed at. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so like, it's just, and as you're talking about it, the rules here are also strangely laid out. There's not many rules, which on one hand is fair. I don't know if this film needed to get bogged down in the same lore and world building as a Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. But on the same token, it does take its commentary seriously. Everything in the middle might come through a comedic lens, but ultimately it wants to say something of meaning. So you can't dismiss the lack of world building when it's trying to have its cake and eat it too. We learn so little about this magical society, and it's so often just sloppily woven into the narrative that even though it might not need Tolkien level backstory, a little more would have given heft to the film and made sense of a lot of choices that are made here, especially with Aaron's monologue at the end, how we arrive there. I love the passion of it. I love his ardent fervor. It's poignant, it's cathartic, but it also feels like it comes out of a completely different movie.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because since there are two sections to this, and it also reminded me a little bit of Kingsman as well, the Secret Society portion at least. Yeah. But you know, if they were to lean more into the satire and you take out, it's like the rom-com or romance portions of the film are taking out the time of what could have been a well fleshed out satire movie, because this could have been hilarious. Like, and again, like with a hilarious title like that, it's something that I think people would go see. But I don't even know who this audience is for, because it's like, I guess in my theater I don't think there was like a single white person there, and it's like, I don't know. It's just a lot of people. I was actually talking to people in my theater about it, and they're like, oh, they're like, yeah, like they just wanted to support, like, you know, a person of color. And I was like, yeah, like I totally get it. But yeah, it's a movie.
It's a movie.
It's a movie.
There's no doubt about that. It's definitely a movie. I do want to echo what you were saying though about the performances. Justin Smith, I do think, is pretty good here. He's great with awkwardness for sure. Anne Lee Bogan. Anne Lee Bogan? I'm not sure how to pronounce her name.
Yeah.
She steals this film.
She does.
She is an incredible discovery for me. At the Infraction Film Awards every year, we have this category, Best Movie Discovery. And that category is for performances like this. Now, I also know I need to go back and watch it now, because I don't really recall what her character is specifically. But one of my favorite films from 2022 was After Yang. I don't know if you saw After Yang. I loved that movie. That was in my top 10 of that year. She was in After Yang. So now I'm really anxious to go back and rewatch that film to look for her specifically, because she did have a small role in it. Okay. But this is really the first thing of hers where she's prominent, that I've seen anyway.
I think it's like her first, like her
I know
first prominent
she
film.
doesn't have too many credits to her name anyway. This is one of her
two TVs.
Yeah, this is one of her most prominent, maybe her most prominent roles yet, and she is great here. She truly will be a contender for me in that category at the end of the year, regardless of the quality of this film. She's awesome. I am very excited to see more from her going forward, because I think she does have star quality. If her career goes the way that we hope it does, I think she could be big. I loved her performance here. I think she's really great, and to me dominates this movie performatively. She's easily the MVP here. She's really great in terms of the dynamic she has with Justice Smith especially, but also Drew Tarver and the few exchanges they have throughout the film. But it's some of the quiet subtleties that she renders here that I think is really fantastic. She's so charming and endearing. You're rooting for her alongside Justice Smith. And they did have a great dynamic that I did really appreciate, which is maybe part of the frustration here, right? Because honestly, as a rom-com, it is effective. like if you remove the satire, if you remove the magical components, and it was just a 90-minute rom-com with those two characters, I'm sold. I'm hooked. I want to see where this goes. You don't have to, introduce this half lazily written lore into this film and this thin commentary to undermine that rom-com sensibility. All of that was honestly really great. Drew Tarver, though, I don't know if it's his performance or the way the character is written. I do think it's perhaps more of a direction thing than it is a Drew Tarver thing, because his character is a little too caricature for me. And understandably, this is trying to be a satire, but Aaron and Lizzie are anything but cartoons in this film. And Jason is a big part of their journey here. So it is quite the contrast when you juxtapose that to something like the Dee Dee character, who is the president of the American Society of Magical Negroes. And she's also quite cartoonish and a little over the top. Yeah. But that whole society is kind of rendered that way throughout the film. There is kind of this amped up, kind of goofiness to how a lot of those scenes are rendered. So that performance doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. Drew Tarver's is a caricature in a movie that is, again, grounded like a rom-com. And that's where, again, the film, it just feels very weird. Yeah.
And even with his character kind of being I'm not sure if we're really talking spoilers, but there's things that he's facing in the film that we don't get a clear answer as to what's going on. At least I didn't feel like we got a clear answer of what was happening.
What his role at the company?
His personal life, because since Aaron was the magical Negro.
That's a great point. Yeah, because we're introduced as he's suffering, and that's why Aaron is assigned to him to begin with. But you are right. The only thing we come to learn is that he was under some stress because of this project at the company they work at. It failed. Yeah. And the company is now in some hot water. I think we're supposed to put those things together. But again, to how sloppily edited this film is, it isn't cogent necessarily. It is a little ambiguous or a little vague there.
Yeah, because, since Aaron, he was assigned to make sure that that his stress level was more, I guess, normal. Yeah.
Happy, to a he's the pander. Happy. He's the pander to him.
He's a pander. Yeah. So it's how is Aaron supposed to fix that? I don't. And then the rear, it's whatever. I guess whatever Drew Avery's character wanted, he just basically was supposed to get, and then that's what kind of created this weird love triangle that never got.
Yeah,
it was resolved, but we didn't.
And this is why the film should have just committed to one over the other, because Aaron, the way it is written on the page, it is very strange, because he is given this job. I guess maybe part of this is to test his loyalty, but if that's the driving force, I think that is also extremely vague and unclear. But he is given his task, his first task after being accepted into this society. He is to look after Jason, the Drew Tarver character, to pander to him, right? And Aaron does very little of that throughout the film. Very little. There are some conversations early on where he's like, yeah, you're a good designer. That'll do the trick. Like, that's all he does. He just says, you're a good designer. Oh, Lizzie, she's really cute. Isn't she great? And even that moment isn't meant to spur on Jason to pursue Lizzie romantically, even though that is the outcome. Like, he was saying that for his own selfish needs, like his own desires for her. So, like, he really does nothing to help out Jason in this role. And I understand that's part of the conflict. Maybe that circles back to that moment I mentioned earlier when he first arrives at the society and they're telling him what they're all about. He is a little standoffish. He doesn't necessarily agree with those politics. He finds it regressive. So maybe that's why he doesn't help out Jason. I don't know. Like, it's honestly so unclear. The only thing we know is he just continues to pursue Lizzie for his own desires. That's it. Which is why, like, it works as a rom-com. It doesn't work as whatever this commentary is supposed to be.
No. Yeah. And it's like, and even within the movie, like, they're telling Aaron, like, the repercussions of interfering with your clients. Yeah. But then, it's like, oh, okay, well, like, they tried to build up the stakes there, and it just does not.
That was happen. A weird moment, because he very much does interfere, but somehow it's okay because someone else interfered more.
That was weird. I don't know. I was so lost towards the end of the movie.
Levels of interference that, it's like whoever gets the highest level, like, they're the one in trouble. Like, I don't
strange. know. And that's the issue with the world building. It's like you're introducing too many rules and too many layers at once.
It's like, it's okay if you cross the line, as long as someone crosses the line further than you did.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah. It's kind of like, it's weird. It's like, oh, your rent's due on the 1st, but you have a 5-day grace period. It's like, oh, it's okay if you miss it on the 1st, but it's because you have these other days to make it up. So there wasn't, I know that's a weird analogy, but it's just something in my brain. It's like, oh yeah, like, this is due whatever day. And then it's like, oh, well, I have 5 more days. So it's fine if I just miss the deadline, and then, like, nothing happens. You just have to make sure. Yeah. But yeah, it's weird, because I did enjoy the factor of where it's kind of showing, Aaron shows interest in Lizzie. He tells Jason this constantly, but Jason comes off as so dense and not much of an airhead. He's just oblivious to a lot of things, where it's like, hey, clearly you have, like, this new guy at work, whatever, saying that he's interested in your work wife, and it just flies over, this flies over his head, and he's like, yeah, so I'm thinking about, Jason's like, I'm thinking about asking out Lizzie, and then it's like, Aaron's been talking up Lizzie for himself for like 15-20 minutes within the movie, and then Jason's like, no, like, I want to ask her out. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And I think during that monologue, he kind of mentioned, or Aaron mentions a few things where it's like, it's kind of the, you see, like, there's someone or something that someone's interested in, and then like for person A, but person B doesn't become interested until they find out someone else is interested in it. I thought that was pretty interesting, but again, they don't really expand because I was waiting to see what was going to happen, and
that would have been interesting if there was some sort of seamless collision between the rom-com or this trio and the premise of the film and its magical sensibilities, because I think what's so obtuse perhaps, or at the very least irritating about that whole idea, what you're talking about, is that Aaron is very interested. He has these deep desires we come to see in Lizzie, and that whole moment is supposed to make Jason, who, let me be crystal clear, is not great. He's very myopic to his own racism. Yeah. And the film makes that very clear. So this isn't a pro-Jason sentiment, but that moment is supposed to make Jason seem foolish and, myopic to the surroundings of the people around him, which he is. He very much is. However, it does not simultaneously indict Aaron, who is very bad at his job, who is very deliberately not doing his job. And so the film is that conflict of how to treat Aaron, because he's the protagonist and he's the one that we're rooting for. And we want him to indulge in this romantic interest. But by doing so, it is counterintuitive to the reason he's there in the first place. But the film doesn't address that. Yeah. If it was both things, if that moment was out to make Aaron and Jason look bad simultaneously, then I think you have some interesting drama there you can mine. But that's not what the film does. It's only there to make Jason look bad while still propping up Aaron, despite Aaron very objectively failing at what he's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
But the film doesn't recognize that. It fails to wrestle with it in any serious, which is why it's hard to, when the film comes down on its social commentary in this very serious tone, it's hard to take it seriously because it doesn't take its own self seriously.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't
agree.
And that's where the film just doesn't seem to be aware that it's becoming a victim of its own ideas instead of propagating something interesting out of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's a weird like paradox kind of thing where
it is very much so.
I don't know, man. It's in like, I know we haven't talked too much about David Alan Grier's character Roger, but at the same time, I mean, I like him as an actor. It's just he was kind of just there, like I don't know.
He is wasted. I agree.
Yeah,
I think he's fine when he's on screen. I think he's fine, but you're right. He isn't asked to do too much. And the one thing I would have really liked, because earlier you were talking about how the rules are kind of all over the place, and we've referenced a few examples of where that doesn't work. One scene that I think would have been extremely effective if they did more of, that I thought was actually really good, was the moment when Roger and Aaron have this intimate conversation when Aaron finds out some personal information about Roger and he brings it to his attention. And this simultaneously does two things where it enhances the character of Roger. It gives us more insight into who he is and why he's still there, why he keeps doing what he's doing, while also kind of playing into the lore a little bit. Because, we come to find out that they're able to fall in love. They're still human. They might have these magical abilities, but they're still human. They have feelings, but they have to let these clients go at the end of the day. And that there's a part of that within Roger's own lore that comes about in this intimate conversation that I thought was really great. It's sincere, and David Alan Grier brings some added poignancy to the film and to his performance that I think is really great. Because up until that point, he's been basically a comedic voice throughout the film, as well as providing a lot of the backstory and lore that the audience needs. So he's doing that, and so it's been mostly a comedic nothing character. But we do learn something about Roger there that I think is fascinating, while again tapping into the mythology of how all of this works. So more scenes like that, I think, would have been fruitful and would have given the film a little bit more spunk, and less of the weird, unfunny stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's weird because it's like, okay, you have the rule is, you have these magical black people, and the reason why the society exists is to make white people comfortable, but it's also to keep them safe. And then, it's kind of like, I feel like David's character was like whispering in Aaron's ear about, like, just like the normal, like, danger society of, like, just being a person of color, like, in, like, America. And I feel like Aaron kind of comes to a realization where he's like, I feel like he was pretty much saying, I'm no safer with the society than I'm not. So, and it's like, he starts to see how weird and backwards those rules were, like you just mentioned with David's, a little bit of his backstory there. And it like, I think the farther you go into the movie, the farther you you start to realize it's like, okay, it's funny, but like, do they really follow these rules? And almost like an uprising in a way sort of happens. But again, it's very unclear because we don't know how the rules work. But then, like, when something happens, you're just like, oh, okay, I guess we're just here now. And then it's like, poof, it's all, I don't know if it's fixed or not, but that also kind of brings in like the Kingsman vibe where no one's really supposed to know that they exist, but it tries to poke fun at itself, and that's I don't know, it just doesn't really sit right with me because it's trying to let us know that it is self-aware. I feel like, but it doesn't hit the mark with something like, I don't know, like Scream. Like, Scream knows what it is, but it's showing you rather than telling you. I'm not sure if that makes any sense.
No, I hear you. I think you're making a lot of sense, and ultimately, I do think it comes down to this film not understanding what it wants to be. Its ideas are kind of all over the place. Its execution is kind of all over the place. And sometimes with a first-time writer and director, you're not going to make American fiction.
No.
Sometimes it's this, and you live and you learn. And I
hope this wasn't a passion project. Well, I guess it was, but yeah.
So like, I think the idea fundamentally, I think, had promise. I just don't think the execution was even close to being there. And we haven't even talked about how drab and how inconsistent the cinematography is here. Like, it's not a visually appealing film either.
No.
So like, it all starts on the page. Like, that script really needed to go through at least a couple of more run-throughs.
Different eyes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The director, Kobi Libii, or Libii, sorry. He's the writer, director, and producer on this movie.
This was his baby. Look, this was his baby, and he feels, like he has his convictions, I'm sure. I haven't really read too many interviews or seen any interviews.
Nor have I.
But, this did play out at Sundance. I'm sure that he was very excited for that. I don't think he anticipated this being their reaction.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it goes to show, like, even though you're the writer, you're the director, you're the producer, that doesn't mean that it's good or that, it can't be in the hands of someone else.
Yeah.
Especially as a first-time writer and director.
Yeah, and that's the tough part where it's like, I obviously like commend him and the rest of the cast and crew for making this, because it seems like they had a lot of fun making this movie, and they're hoping that people get something out of it. And like there are a few good lines of dialogue that are in there, like we've mentioned before, but for a movie that's half about magic, it just didn't feel very magical. Like it didn't look very magical.
No, because it's mostly a rom-com. That's the thing. And even
that part was good. That was a good
that part was good. And the thing that just I struggled to wrap my mind around, I know we've talked about it, is that even though when he's on the job and he's supposed to be, he's supposed to be helping out Jason. Lizzie is certainly a part of that. Like, you can still bring in some of those magical qualities into the mix there. And the film just refuses to do so.
Yeah.
Just refuses, unless it's interrupted weirdly by Roger popping in and out.
Always.
Or some doctor crossing the line. And so everybody's like weirdly brought into the same space. Like, it's strange. Like, the editing here, the story, it's so manufactured. It's just not good. It's not good.
Yeah.
I will be curious, though, how this fares in the streaming space. You know what I mean? Because this feels like a movie that could find an audience there. Kind of like what we saw with Noah on Netflix over the last 2 weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
and that's tough.
You never know.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, you're good. No, I was just going to say, like, it made $1 million over the weekend. Obviously, a lot of people were disappointed when the trailer dropped. And the reviews aren't great, so people don't care right now. But in another 6 months,
maybe,
who's to say it doesn't find more of an audience there?
Yeah, and I think that's part of it's tough because us as moviegoers, like we'll opt in for the theater over streaming like any day of the week. Like, we recognize that movie theaters are still relevant, and like I think that they're still here to stay, and that is the superior platform or way to watch a movie. But I'm as soon as you said, like, if this would have done better on streaming, it's not that it felt like a streaming movie, but it's almost like, because there are some films that you go to see and you're like, well, yeah, I probably could have watched, like, I could have waited for streaming for this, but this is what we do, this is our job. But I can see the general audience waiting until this hits Prime or Peacock. I think Focus Features is under Universal, maybe.
I think know. I can't recall.
I think Universal owns them. I could be wrong.
I could try to look it up real fast.
I could see this streaming on
Universal.
Peacock.
That is
it
correct.
Is Universal. Okay, so yeah, I could definitely see the streaming on Peacock. Alongside Firestarter and Five Nights at Freddy's. But
there you go. Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, it's tough when I can imagine being like the writer producer, like this being like your first feature film, which, I mean, it's only an hour and 44 minutes, so it's not very long.
Yeah.
But I can understand, it's a tough crowd out there. It's tough. Rotten Tomatoes is as well, 31% for tomato for the critic side, but the audience seems to be enjoying a little bit more at 65% as of the recording of this episode. But yeah, I mean, I feel like that's it's gotten all the marketing it could get. That's all I gotta say.
I agree. All right, well, with all of that said, do you have any final thoughts on the American Society of Magical Negroes?
No, not really. Just Justice Smith, great part of the movie, as well as his love interest, on Lee Bogan. Yeah, I don't really have too much to say.
No, I don't blame you. No, I think we've mined enough out of this. I don't know if there's really too much else to lay out here. Other than I'll say Rupert Friend has a weird cameo at the end of this film that, again, feels very wasted. I don't know why we're casting him for that tiny little role, but it is what it is. For me, this was the Onley Bogan story. She's the MVP. She's really great here. I'm very, very excited to see her in more work. You mentioned the video game scene early on, or in this conversation anyway. And it's an interesting idea visually. It's funny to see them playing VR while having this massive conversation. And I guess there's some humor to be had there. But it quickly devolves into this moment of quote unquote commentary that just comes off trite. And I just don't think it has much bite because there's no politics to this film.
Yeah.
And it's wanting to be more about the relationships and the rom-com of it than it is about the satire. And because Jason is such a caricature, again, it just feels vapid to me. So it's an interesting visual. I'll give it that. But I don't think it's anything more than that. I actually think the scene is kind of bad on the whole.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know,
it's one of those things.
One of those things. Not a great movie. I do not recommend this, but I'm sure a lot of people will still see it once it comes out on streaming, and I'll be curious to hear what you all have to say about it if you indeed do catch up with it. With that said, if you agree or disagree with anything you had to say, you can, of course, leave a comment here on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, or you can reach out to us on social media or email us insessionfilm@gmail.com. Christian, thanks so much for being here, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me again. Like it's always a pleasure coming on to the In Session Film podcast. And yeah, like, I mean, good or bad, where we're talking about movies, and that's what we love to do.
That is what we love to do, indeed. Where can we find your work online? Where can we find you on social media?
So you can find my work over at Film Optics. That is Optics with an X on Instagram, Twitter, all that social media garbage. And you can find our audio only podcast, Film Optics, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. We are there.
Yeah, please go check them out. Great stuff. Love you as always, Christian. Thank you so much for being here, my friend.
Thanks, buddy.
Really
I love you too.
Appreciate it. We have to show some love around here because the films are not doing it right now.
I know. Also, get better, Brendan.
I know. Get better, Brendan.
Listen to some Nickelback. It'll make you feel a lot better.
Yeah, we do hope that Brendan recovers nicely. Just want to say quickly to check out episode 577. We talk about the Ghostbusters franchise, if that interests anyone out there. There's a new Ghostbusters movie coming out this weekend. Maybe you didn't know about that either, but there's one coming out, and we talk about the Ghostbusters franchise on the main show this week, and it was a lot of fun, so you can be on the lookout for that. We'll also have a review of Love Lies Bleeding coming out soon as well, so be on the lookout for that. Before we get out of here quickly, again, if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, all that fun stuff. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please rate and review us. It really helps us out. And if you really want to support the show, you can become an In Session Film VIP. There are 3 ways to do that. You can subscribe on Patreon at patreon.com/InSessionFilm. Again, here on YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, there's the YouTube memberships. You can join the channel. It's a very small monthly fee, and you'll get access to all of our bonus content. Same thing with Apple Podcast subscriptions. All of that is available, and we really appreciate anyone that wants to check us out there. With that said, thank you, Christian, one more time for being here. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Oh man, I was really disappointed by this one.
Yeah.